you might hear some people griping about the gender and race swapping of characters, but that isn't something that only exists in the 21st century. In 1940, Howard Hawks directed an adaptation of the play The Front Page. Instead of a male editor and reporter, the reporter was to be a woman named Hildy Johnson. This also meant that the person she intends to marry is a man. The film couldn't be that progressive. Female reporter, discussions of divorce, derogatory comments towards newsmen, and illegal behaviors by characters was enough to challenge the censors. His Girl Friday didn't set out to be a progressive film. It just ended up that way. In today's video, we will be discussing the film with mentions of the play. If you haven't seen the film and wish to, it is available on various streaming services for free as it is in the public domain. Where you can stream will be listed in the description box below. Hello, and thank you for joining me on the Quiet Riot, where we talk film, television, media, with an emphasis on old movies and nostalgic favorites. I'm Ainsley, and in today's video, we are discussing His Girl Friday. I haven't watched His Girl Friday in a really long time, and then when I saw it was available on various streaming services, I had to go watch it again, and it was definitely different than I remember on many fronts. I think because now being a lot older, I'm more connected to the characters, particularly the character of Hildy, played by Rosalind Russell. And I remember just the quickness, like how fast-paced everything was, and that was really what was on the forefront for me. And that definitely changes, and I think with time I'll find that even more so. I remember the character of Hildy Johnson and what her character represents more than the fast-paced dialogue between these characters. So in today specifically, we will be discussing the film itself as well as its connection to the play, as well as the gender swapping and the character of Hildy Johnson and what she represents. So let's go. Starring Cary Grant as the editor and Rosalind Russell as the reporter, with Ralph Bellamy as the man Hildy wants to marry, and Jane Lockhart as the man sentenced to hanging. The film follows a news editor who will stop at nothing to stop his ex-wife and reporter from remarrying. Cary Grant's character, Walter Burns, isn't the good old guy. He is not a very likable person, and a lot of the characters in this movie are not particularly likable, which does make it stand out, especially for the time. I think that a lot of the times people, when they are writing a script, they're making a movie, or they're even writing a book, they're thinking about making all of these characters, or making a good portion of their characters, or making their leads a lot more desirable to a wide stream, to an audience. In the case of His Girl Friday, I just don't think that was much of a concern, especially considering the play itself and what it's about, and then you add on what His Girl Friday is about in particular, and it's just not a priority to make these characters 100% likable. And to see that that is also a trait of Hildy Johnson makes this even better, because I do think, because during this period there was this, they were going back to seeing certain characters, especially female characters, in black and white. There was no middle ground, and they didn't really show the push and pull that women have in their lives, and in contrast to that, that is something that His Girl Friday does very well. Directed by Howard Hawks from a script by Charles Ledier, with additional dialogue by Maury Reiskind. Adapted from The Front Page, a play written by Charles MacArthur and Ben Hesh, who also assisted in the film's script, though went uncredited. His Girl Friday was released by Columbia Pictures and was a critical and commercial success upon its release, and it still earns high praise to this day. In 1939, while producing Only Angels Have Wings, Howard Hawks pitched a remake of The Front Page to Harry Cohen of Columbia Pictures. The Front Page was first adapted in and released in 1931. Cary Grant was immediately cast, but Cohen intended for him to play the reporter with radio commentator Walter Winchell as the editor. The film was initially intended to be a straightforward adaptation of the play, but when Hawks had his secretary read the part of the reporter during auditions, Hawks believed that the line sounded better with a woman. The reporter was then changed to a woman, Hildy Johnson, and they turned her into the ex-wife of the editor. Cohen purchased the rights to The Front Page that year. From the start, the studio wanted Cary Grant in a role, though this was eventually changed to Cary playing the editor. However, casting the reporter was a lot harder than expected. They initially wanted Carole Lombard for the role, though she was much more expensive now that she was gone to freelance, because at the time the actors were on studio contracts, and at this point Carole Lombard had gone freelance, which makes her a lot more expensive, and this was something that was very rare at the time. They weren't able to get her, so they ended up offering the role to many others, including Claudette Colbert, and there was Jane Arthur, who was suspended from her contract after she turned it down. Rosalind Russell, who had just finished The Women, was eventually cast in the role of Hildy, and to be honest, I could not think of anybody else in this role. And it could be because we're several years on now, but it definitely seems that it was made for her. Russell reveals in her autobiography that she believed Grant had the better lines in the film, so she hired her own scriptwriter to write lines for her. Since Hawks allowed room for improvisation, Russell would slip her lines in. The restaurant scene in the film, which took 4 days to film, which took 2 more days than the average filming of a scene, making it 4 scenes long. The scene featured many of those improv lines by Russell, and the actors could barely eat during that scene to help with the continuity. The film is known for its very rapid dialogue and the overlapping sentences. This was done in the original play and film, but Hawks is quoted as saying to Peter Bogdanovich, "I had noticed that when people talk, they talk over one another, especially people who talk fast or who are arguing or describing something. So we wrote the dialogue in a way that made the beginnings and ends of sentences unnecessary. They were there for overlapping." Hawks' intention with this movie was to set out and break the record for fastest dialogue held by The Front Pages from the original adaptation of the play The Front Page, released in 1931. This eventually caused difficulties in filming, as the technology at the time was not up to par, and cinematographers found it difficult to follow along thanks to the improvisation, and they never knew where to go. The film finished production in November 1939, 7 days past schedule. While the Friday in the title is a reference to the character in Robin Crusoe, Hildy Johnson is not a servant to Cary Grant's Walter Burns. She is his equal. The film shows a contrast between the desires that Hildy has to be treated like a woman, but her struggles to actually commit to a lifestyle that was stereotypical for some women at the time. She says she wants to be a housewife, but when she is thrown back into the life she leads as a reporter, Hildy finds it difficult to pull away. Today, when some people look back at the past, they only see women who stayed home and cooked and cleaned and took care of the children. But that was a privilege. Even for those that had that privilege, it wasn't always a luxury. There was many opposing expectations for women, and while that is still a struggle today, it was even more of a problem back then. In the 1930s and 1940s, it was not uncommon for women to leave their job once they got married. Hildy wants to do that because she believes that is what she is supposed to do. She wants to be more desirable to men. If so-called Alpha Males podcast has taught us anything, it's that there are a great deal of men who don't like a powerful woman. Maybe she works a lot. and she does roles that certain people will typically say belong only to men. And that is the world that Hildy Johnson lives in, and she wants to part ways with the lifestyle that she built with herself, even though that's where her true desire leads. It's hard to see if her desire to be a wife and to not work anymore has anything to do with something she herself really wants, and only has to do with what she thinks she should want. However, her life as a reporter, a career dominated by men, and almost predominantly by men at the time, is important to her. The entire film is at opposition with the domestic lifestyle. It also shows us that marriage doesn't mean you have to give up the job that makes you happy. Reporting clearly makes Walter Burns happy, and it makes Hildy Johnson happy. But the question is, can they be happy as a couple and happy as reporters? By the end of the film, His Girl Friday seems to state that they clearly can't be. And this has nothing to do with two people who love each other not being able to work and do the jobs that they desire to do and to follow their dreams. No, this has every bit to do with who Walter Burns is as a character. As I stated before, he's not particularly likable. He has spent this entire film trying to get his ex-wife not to remarry, and his way of doing this is to try to get her fiancé into trouble. He even gets him thrown in jail twice. No, they can't work out because Cary Grant's character is not a person who's particularly capable of growth. And he doesn't really have to be, because at the time specifically, men were just expected to work and there was no growth needed. Though the women needed to experience a lot more growth. And honestly, I think that's why women, even today, expect so little and why the bar is so low. As an audience, we don't, or at least we shouldn't, root for Burns and Johnson to get back together. I, for one, am happy that Johnson ended up choosing her career over marriage to somebody that she obviously didn't love very much. She loved the idea of the lifestyle that she was going to lead, but that wasn't a lifestyle that she really wanted. She just thought she was supposed to want it, and she wanted to go for it. She does want to be desired by men, but honestly, she wants to be desired by men, but not as herself. And I do wish that could have been explored a little bit more, and from today's perspective that would be a lot easier to explore. And to be honest, they were dealing with things pretty well, and it wasn't even super explicit, nor do I think it was entirely intentional. At the end, we should be rooting for Johnson to find the middle ground between being a badass reporter and being the woman she wants to be. Because in the 1940s, the world was telling her she can't do both. You can do both. Gender swapping characters does not always work, but sometimes, and in the case like Here's Girl Friday, it opens up many perspectives. Perspectives that many people in the 1940s were not looking at. Regardless of who you are, we can be pulled in multiple directions. The character of Hildy speaks to me as a woman, but she can also speak to you regardless of your gender. From my perspective, Hawks is saying that life is continually in movement and there is no end to the story. Hildy makes her own progress in this movie, even if it doesn't look like what's expected, and we the audience know that there is more to her story. His Girl Friday is not Walter Burns' movie. It's Hildy Johnson's. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. I thoroughly appreciate it. I would love to know your personal thoughts on the film His Girl Friday, so if you've already seen it, leave me a comment below, and if you plan on going to see this for yourself on the many platforms that it is on, please do. I would love to know your opinions, your thoughts, and your thoughts in this video, so come back and leave me a comment below. I would love to have an open discussion. I do believe that this film shows us multiple perspectives, and from a modern standpoint, we can look at it even deeper. And like I said, I don't think that every aspect of this movie that how I personally see it is necessarily intentional, but looking at it as, you know, especially looking at all of the nuance and all the things that are not particularly, there's not a pinpoint what it is saying, but I do find that gender doesn't necessarily, that gender and gender roles do not exactly exist in the same way that we see them as in His Girl Friday, but they still exist to an extent that we as an audience can look deeper into these characters.
I lost some footage, my apology, but I just wanted to come on here and say that remember there is always one more than one way to be a woman, a man, and a person. It really is just you and what makes you happy and what you are capable of doing at that moment, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Hildy was trying to find a life outside her work as well as still being this incredibly badass reporter, and my hope for Hildy is that she eventually is able to do that.
Thank you once again for watching this video. I highly appreciate it. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like and subscribe and ring that bell to be notified every single time I post if you want to. Comment below with any of your thoughts, recommendations, anything you would like to see on this channel. I would love to hear from you, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!